Hi, my name is Amarissa, and you're about to watch a message that was preached right here at Calvary in Miramar, Florida. As a church, we exist to help people take their next step with God. If you want to know more about Calvary, please download our mobile app by searching My Calvary on the Google Play or App Store.
How's everybody doing? Hey, we are so glad that you're here. I love 1 o'clock. You know how I feel. You know 1 o'clock is my favorite service because you bring a high energy, because you've been sleeping for like 12 hours. So that's why you're able to do it. So, all right. So I entered the workforce at age 12. I would work with my stepdad. He worked at this cold store. He ran a cold storage facility that would store all kinds of things in these deep freeze or coolers, like these giant coolers. So I was 12 years old, I kid you not. I was driving a forklift, pallet jack, hand truck, all of this at 12 years old, and all for no pay. 3 days a week after school, I worked there, all for no pay, because my parents told me that I was gaining a work ethic. That was my pay. And then if I worked all day on Saturday, which I did many times, I would get $20. Essentially, my parents were running a sweatshop. But then my parents split up, and then I moved to Florida, and I got my first real job, like W-2 real job, at 15 at Wendy's. That was my first real job. And last week we were driving up the turnpike, and because that's all there is. We stopped at Wendy's, and my kids they're like, "Dad, didn't you work at Wendy's?" I'm like, "I did." So I'm dropping so much Wendy's knowledge on them. And they're like, "Dad, why are the burgers square at Wendy's?" And I'm like, "Because Dave Thomas always said he never cuts corners. That's why that's true, by the way. See, that's a deep cut. I'm glad no one responded to that." So anyway, we're not responding, but we are going to pick up a Baconator later. But after 9 months, I left because I got a job at this new company that was opening called Target. Maybe you've heard of them. And I'm going to be honest with you, straight up, I left for the money because they were paying like 60 cents more an hour. I was going to get paid $4.44. That's what they were paying, $4.44 an hour. This was also 1989. So this is, before anything. And so I was a stock boy, and I didn't really like it, I'll be honest with you. And so I quit. Well, I didn't quit. I did the mature thing. I just stopped showing up. And so I got home. I remember one day I got home from school, and I was watching cartoons, and my mom comes in, and she says, "Robert, why did you quit Target? That was a good job for you. You should go back." And I don't know what got into me, but I'm like, you know what? You're right. So I got up. I still had the vest, because back then they didn't wear like the red polo shirts. You just wore whatever you want. Then you can't just wear this red vest over it. So I grabbed the vest, hopped onto my scooter. I was irresistible. Red vest and a scooter. Anyway. And so I go back to Target. I didn't talk to the manager. Instead, I just went to the machine that you punch in, and I'm like, I wonder. I punched in my code, and it worked. So I just went to the back and started working. And so I'm there for like an hour, just unloading this truck. And my boss walks by and he's like, "Franquez, didn't you quit?" And I said, "Yeah, but I'm back." And he goes, "Okay." That's how I got my job back at Target, and then I quit a month later. And so this is the problem. This is the problem that so many of us have when it comes to work, is that we tend to see work as a necessary evil. And we think of it a lot of times as like the penalty box between the weekends. Because what's going to happen is, you're going to notice this. At about 4 o'clock today, it's going to hit you. And you're going to be like, oh. It's like as you had no idea tomorrow was going to happen. And you're like, oh, snap. It's going to happen, and then you're like, I'm going back into the penalty box for 5 days. And listen, there's a reason why there's a saying called "Thank God It's Friday." We even named a restaurant after it. It's not a good restaurant, but we named a restaurant nonetheless. And it's not because "Thank God It's Wednesday" didn't catch on. It's because people are unhappy, right, with their jobs. In fact, the Gallup organization did a study, and here's what they found. Greater than 80% of people are dissatisfied with their job. I mean, that's huge. And here's why that's huge, is because whether you realize it or not, you are going to spend 1/3 of your life working. Now, I may have just completely bummed you out right now, like, dang, Pastor, you're really going to drop that truth on us right now? And I was like, but it's for real. You're going to spend 1/3 of your life working. You may as well be happy doing it. And if the songs that we sing about work are any indicator, we're not happy. And so I did this thing the other night, and I'm like, and I just had this thought, like, what songs are written about work? Like, there's no good songs. There's no happy song that has the lyric, like, that involves the word cubicle. Like, none, not even one. And I did some extensive research on this, nothing. So, but I started looking at what are like the most famous songs about work. Then here was the first one that came up. That was Manic Monday by the Bangles. Did anybody remember that song? Yeah, that's a really good song, actually. And the funny part is that the Bangles are complaining about work. They didn't even write that song. The one part of work that musicians do, they didn't even write it. Prince wrote the song. True, Prince wrote the song. So he's the only one working in this situation. So then, so that was the first one that came up. The second one was, and I'll just show you this. I must have watched this like 100 times. This is, the band is Loverboy, which as far as band names go, it's not bad. But this is a song, Working for the Weekend. If you remember, anybody remember Working for the Weekend? If you do, then you're not as young as you think you are. And so, sorry, I remember that song well. And so, and I'll tell you what's working in this song is this whole ensemble. Leather pants with a leather jacket with the red headband. And because I like to be prepared, I watched the behind the scenes of the making of this video. And the guy's headband was leather as well. So anyway, points for that. Then there was this other song that came out when I was probably in about the 5th grade. And this was She Works Hard for the Money by Donna Summer. And I don't know if you remember this song, where this song was, I remember the video really well. And if you're young, I'm gonna blow your mind right now. There was a time, right? There was this channel called MTV. And there was a time, I'm telling you, I'm gonna blow your mind. There was a time when MTV, music television, all they did 24 hours a day was play music. That's it. They just would talk for like a second. They're like, hey, we're not talking television. Here's more music. Anyway, it was great. And then they started doing reality TV, and anyway, now it's terrible. But I remember the video for She Works Hard for the Money, right? With Donna Summer, she worked at a diner, and everyone at the diner was horrible. And then she would come home, and then her kids would start giving her, a hard time, and she started saying, she works hard for the money, so you better treat her right. And so the song isn't really even about work. It's about having kids giving you too much lip. And it's like, hey, throttle it back. I'm working hard for the money. So anyway, it's really more a song about parenting at the end. Then there was this guy, which, by the way, points on the stash. This guy had a song called Take This Job and Shove It. And I can mention this song in church because he didn't specify where the shoving was taking place. But the guy's name was Johnny Paycheck. And listen, every once in a while, life gives you a gift. And that's when a song called Take This Job and Shove It is written by a guy named Johnny Paycheck. And we just say thank you for that. And the funny part is, if you read the lyrics to this song, is that he's talking so tough, but then you get to the end and he's like, I wish I had the guts to say it. So it's like, even at the end, like, he's still going to work. He's just in his mind dreaming of telling his boss, hey, I can tell you where you can take your job. Probably the best song written about work, the most realistic song, and it's not Working Man by Rush. And I feel like Rush songs are underrepresented in my messages, and we'll do our best to fix that. And only about 6 people have come up to me and be like, hey, I appreciate the Rush comment. And so anyway, it's because it's just, not a lot of Canadian bands getting represented in my messages. Anyway, so probably the most accurate song about work is 9 to 5 by Dolly Parton. Now, the problem with this song is that there was a movie that went with it. I saw this movie in the movie theater at East Side Cinemas in Brockton, Massachusetts. Why? Because I'm that old, all right? That I saw this movie in the theater. Now, here's the issue with this. And it stars Dolly Parton, Jane Fonda, and Lily Tomlin. I don't even know why I know all these names. I just do. And so the whole point is that they have this boss who is a complete jerk, and these three women come up with this conspiracy plan. They're like, we have had it with him. We like working in this company, but we don't like him. So they take him, they kidnap him, and they tie him up at Dolly's house, and then they go back, and these three women start running the company, which really just sends a weird message to people, that it's like, if you don't like your boss, take hostages. And it's just not the way to do this, but yet here we are. So, but listen, here's why we tend to sing the songs we sing and say the things we say, and it's because a lot of times we feel stuck. We feel stuck somewhere between our day job and our dream job. And what I want to do in this message is I want to talk about what Solomon has to say about work. Now, Solomon, if you're not aware, I know if you've been to the series and you're thoroughly aware, but if you're not, Solomon was the third king of Israel. He was the son of King David. King David was, David and Goliath, a lot of press about David. David becomes king, and then after he dies, his son Solomon becomes king. Solomon was said, at least what we read about in the records of the kings, is that Solomon was the wisest man in the world up until that time. Some have even said that he's the wisest man ever to live. Jesus, and we read the Gospels, the accounts of Jesus' life, Jesus comments on the wisdom of Solomon. And Jesus, once again, if Jesus tells you you're wise, that's something to put on your business card, something to put on a Google review, because that's going to get you some clients. And so all of the wisdom of Solomon, all these sayings that he had, were collected. They were put into a document, and which now we have in our Bibles in a document that's called Proverbs, and that's found in the Hebrew Scriptures. And here's why this wisdom is so important. Because most of us have said this at some point in our lives. We've said this: if I knew then what I know now, things would be different. And so because of that, we have this idea, and we're right, that hindsight brings a level of wisdom to it. But here's what wisdom does, is that it takes the understanding that we have from hindsight and puts it on the front end of circumstances, the front end of situations, to make us make better and wiser choices. And so what I want to do is that I want to talk about, because Solomon has so much to say on the subject of work, how to be successful at work, how to find the purpose of work while you're at work. And here's the thing that's amazing, is that there is a purpose to why God has you where you are. You might not know it, but God has a reason for why he has you where you are. And when you embrace it, it won't matter what you're doing, and whether you like it or not, you're going to be able to find joy when you realize that God has a reason for why you're there. So I looked at, and there's so many verses that Solomon talks about, and what I saw was there was like these three themes that are kind of working through all the passages that deal with, all the Proverbs that Solomon deals with when it comes to work. And so what I did is kind of take them and put them in these three buckets that we're going to go through together. But here's the first one if you're a note taker, and that is this: when it comes to work, stop thinking of work like a curse. Stop thinking of work like a curse. Now, before I get into what Solomon has to say, I want to take a step back, and I want to set up the worldview that Solomon had coming into this. Now, this is an important thing for us, because especially those of us that are Christians, that this is the worldview that Jesus had when it comes to looking at, how the world works, and that because work shows up in the Genesis account. Now, those of us that are Christians, we would say, oh yeah, I know that there's the curse, mankind sins, there's a curse, and then God institutes work. Well, actually, that's not the case. Work actually shows up long before Eve shows up. Work shows up long before there's forbidden fruit and all of that, and mankind falling into sin. All of that, it all happens before. And that's very important for us to understand, because work, as we're going to see, is not a curse. And I understand if you're not a Christian and you say, well, I don't believe the Genesis account happened. Well, I'm just going to have you just kind of track with me for a minute, because I think at the very least we can agree that what this account that's written influenced the worldview of everything that came later. And it colored how they saw the world. And it's an important point for us, especially as we go forward when it comes to work. And that is this, and I want to show you what happened. God creates man, and I want to show you what he does. Look what he says in Genesis 2. He says, the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. Now, I want you to think about that. He takes the man, puts him in the garden to do what? To be a gardener. to do this manual labor to start gardening. Now, here's why this is important. Because gardening is the paradigm for all work. Because there's only three types of work. There's entrepreneurial work, there's managerial work, and there's technical work. And everything, if all of us stood up and said, well, what do you do? It would be something that was either entrepreneurial, managerial, or technical. Everything falls into them. And the cool thing is this, is that gardening, being the basis of all work, which is what this first man was given, encompasses all three of those things. There's a gardener, the entrepreneurial gardener comes in and says, hey, you know what? There's nothing here. There should be a garden here. And he creates something out of nothing. The managerial gardener comes in and says, hey, you got this garden, but there's things that need to be trimmed and pruned, and hedges need to be cut back, and these other parts need to be grown a little bit more. And then there's the technical gardener is the one that says, yeah, that's all good. I just want to get my hands dirty and start planting things. And whether you realize it or not, and once again, it's very simple. If you say, well, hey, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a business owner, then you'd say, yeah, you connect with that because you took something, you saw a need in the market, and you started something from nothing. If you say, well, I don't know, I mean, how am I, if you work in an office, you say, well, how am I a gardener? Well, you're administrating things, right? And what you're doing is you're trimming, you're keeping order, you're making sure things are organized, that things are happening, things are being paid on time. That's gardening work. If you're a teacher, listen, you're a gardener. You're shaping lives, you're planting ideas that take root and flourish in the lives of the people that you teach. And so what's the point? The point is that God is showing the man that paradise does not stay paradise unless the man works at it. Now here's why this is important, is because he's setting all of this up because he's assuming that we all know that story. Because in Proverbs chapter 24, he's going to start by telling us this, and it's in your notes. He says, I went by the field of the lazy man, and by the vineyard of the man devoid of understanding. And there it was, all overgrown with thorns. Its surface was covered with nettles. Its stone wall was broken down. When I saw it, I considered it well. I looked on it and received instruction. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and so shall your poverty come like a prowler, and your need like an armed man. Solomon gives us this picture that parallels the Genesis passage, and he shows us what happened. This is what happens when you don't neglect the garden. Paradise continues. This is what happens when you do neglect the garden, that the weeds overtake it, and there's no room for the crops that are going to feed your family. Why? Because the lazy man simply sees work as a necessary evil. And if we decide that work, well, I just see it as a curse, it will show up in how we work. But that's not, listen, that work, God gives man the work as a blessing, that this is going to be part of the vehicle as to how God develops him. When I was in college, I had this job on a construction site for a little while, and my job, I was on the Intercoastal in Fort Lauderdale. And I mean, these are people that just have way more money than sense. But these people had bought a house it's like $1 million house on the Intercoastal of Fort Lauderdale, and because it wasn't laid out the way they liked it, they completely gutted the house. And so I was there as part of the crew that was gutting the house. So I'm on the roof, and we're pulling all the tiles off of the roof. And so I meet this guy named Martin, who I'm working with, who's probably the laziest individual I've ever met in my life. And that's why I remembered his name. Anyway, so he gives me this tool. He says, here's how you pull off all of the tiles. And so you just kind of pull these tiles off, and then you throw them into this giant dumpster that was sitting in the driveway of the house. And so he's like, so we got to take every tile off this roof. I said, okay, no problem. So I start going. And then he comes to me after probably about an hour, and he's like, Bob, you got to slow down. And I said, okay. And he said, do you see this? We got to make this last the whole week. If not, who knows what they're going to make us do if we go down into the house. So I just want you to slow down. Then he said these words to me. He goes, can I just tell you about one of my life mottos? And I said, okay. He says, let me just tell you how I live. We're just taking this one break at a time. That's how this guy lives his life, right? We're taking this one break at a time. This is like something you put on like a headstone, so-and-so. He was living life one break at a time. And anyway, so by lunch that day, just a true story, by lunch that day, he's actually swimming in the people's pool. And I'm like, what in the world is going on here? And I'm like, how does this guy still have a job? Turns out he was the general contractor's nephew. That's how you make all that work out. And I'm like, I think if I took a couple laps, I wouldn't be working here. And now, here's the point. The attitude that we bring to work comes out in our work. If you see work as a curse, your work will come out as such. If you see work that, listen, this is part of what God is doing in my life, because there is this, I'm created in his image, and so there's just this work nature that God does. God creates, and so now I have this idea that I create as well. And you say, okay, I'm good with that. But what happens if I hate what I'm doing and I feel stuck? What do I do? Well, this is the thing that Solomon brings up next. Look at what he says. Look at Proverbs 30, you see this. He says, there are 4 things which are little on the earth, but they are exceedingly wise. The ants are a people not strong, yet they prepare their food in the summer. And here's how I phrase that. And that is, think future, act present. Now, here's what Solomon says. This is why ants are so wise. Because they think about the future, and their thoughts about the future make them act in the present. So they aren't making decisions about their future haphazardly. They have a goal in mind. And so what is their goal? Get ready for winter. It's the middle of the summer. Get ready for winter. Hey, what are we doing today? Getting ready for winter. And everything that they do is with that goal in mind. Now, let me tell you how this works for us, is that the average person, this is what studies show, the average person does about 2 hours worth of work in an 8-hour workday. And you know why that is? It's not because we're thrilled about what we're doing. It's because a lot of times we're really unhappy with what we're doing, and we're just kind of trying to grind it out. And we'll say, well, what do I do if I don't like what I'm doing? Then here's what you got to do. You got to think future and act present. You got to work hard in the thing that you're doing now while you get ready to do the thing that you ultimately want to do. Because whether you realize it or not, you are representing God in the place that you work. And you say, well, but I'm the only Christian in my office. Do you know that might be by design? Yeah, but I don't like the office that I work in. I think everyone there is demon-possessed. And, well, the jury's out on that. But once again, the issue is maybe. Think about this. Before you were there was no one there who was a Christian. And God sent you there, and maybe he sent you there to be a light in that very place. And maybe you're there not just for you, but maybe God wants to use you to impact someone else's future. So let me tell you how it worked for me. I became a Christian at age 19, and before I was 20, I knew that God, I felt God calling me to ministry. And so even when I was first starting college, I kind of knew exactly what I was going to do. And so from a very, once again, as just 19, 20 years old, I was very clear about what I was going to do. And every choice I made was kind of leading me towards eventually being here. And so, but the one thing that was a little odd for me is that I'm like, eventually I want to be in ministry. I want to teach the Bible. I want to pastor a church. But I didn't see myself as being in ministry until I started doing this. That's kind of what was my thinking in my early 20s. And that is, when I start doing that, that's when I'm really going to be in ministry. But now I'm just, delivering food, or now I'm just, on a roof pulling tiles or whatever. So I'm about halfway through college, and I hear this lecture. And there would be these lectures that, and I don't know why they would schedule these classes on Friday nights, but it was Friday nights, and the class was called Lectures in Ministry and Theology. And you're like, wow, that sounds so exciting. They make a movie about that? And so, anyway, one of the lectures was from this business leader. The guy was not in ministry at all, or at least I thought. And he's not a pastor, but he talks about how he was in ministry. And he's like, I'm not a pastor, but I am in ministry because every person that I come into contact with, I want them to feel valued, and I want them to know that they're loved by God. And I'm telling you, and it was so simple, right? And maybe you're here and you're like, wow, that's so basic, right? I already knew that, and I didn't know that, right? And so that lecture just changed my entire thinking, and I'm like, everything that I'm doing, like I'm in ministry right now. So at the time, I was working at this company that manufactured home accessories. And the name of the company was Clay, Metal, and Stone, or as we called it internally, Crazed, Mental, and Stoned. Because, it was the office before the office was the office. And so now, the way that this place worked was everyone had a title. Didn't matter what you did in that office, you had a title. Like customer service, there were two people who worked in customer service. The customer service manager and the customer service assistant manager. But who were they managing? Nobody knows. But the one guy was assisting. That we know that. Anyway, so it's just so weird. But the only person who didn't have a title in that entire company was me. Because what happened is that they all went, all these people that worked there went to the owner, whose name also happened to be Bob. And they said, Bobby, here's the problem. We all have stuff that you want us to do, but we can't do it. Can we create a job, which they were basically saying, can we create like a junk drawer position? All the stuff that nobody wants to do, and just make that the job description. It's just like the catch-all of everything no one wants to do. And he said, okay, let's do that. So my friend Bill, who worked there, called me and said, hey, I have the perfect job for you. And to come in and interview. So I go in and interview for the job. Now you got to understand this. This is a long time ago. So this is maybe 1995. So this is before, iPads and phones and electricity and so anyway. So I didn't own a computer. And so every time I'd write a paper for college, I'd have to go to the library, if you can believe that. My little sister had this Tandy computer, remember Tandy computers, and had a dot matrix printer that you had to kind of, the little dot, and then like, anyway. So the lady is interviewing me, and she says, well, do you know Word? I'm like, do I know Word? I know all the words. And I'm like, I don't know if you know this, but once again, I'm getting a theology degree, and I know words you probably don't even know. I know Greek words, Hebrew words. And she's like, okay. Do you know Excel? And I'm like, ma'am, I excel at everything I do. And she's looking on like, who is this idiot that has been brought to me? But once again, we just need a guy with a pulse to do this job, so you're hired, and Bill says you're okay. So anyway, they end up hiring me, and I meet this girl. I meet this girl named Judy, who's one of the girls that works there, and she had just become the assistant designer, which there's only two people. There was the head designer, and then of course the assistant designer, because everyone had a title except for me. And like when they had all of the extensions, it would say like, owner, customer service manager, assistant manager, designer, assistant designer, head of accounts payable, head of accounts receivable, Bob. Anyway, so it was like adding insult to injury. So anyway, so I meet this girl, Judy, and Judy says to me, she's like, so, you're in school, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm in college, get a theology degree. Why do you get a theology degree? I want to be a pastor. So anyway, a year and a half later, I get hired by my church. And I'm in my last semester of college, and I get hired by my church because they come to me and they're like, hey, we have this job, this is true story. Like, we have all this stuff that nobody wants to do, and we're creating a job description. And I'm like, I have a lot of experience in doing things that no one else wants to do. And so I get hired at Calvary Chapel, Fort Lauderdale. It's the church I came from. And then I was on staff there for almost 5 years. And so I forget all about Crazed, Mental, and Stoned. And so then I come and start this church. And so now we're here, and then the pastor calls me and says, hey, Bob, would you come up and teach for me one night? And I'm like, yeah, sure, I'd love to come up. So I'm driving up there. Now, this is several years later. And they send me a text. They said, hey, listen, just so you know, when you get there, someone's going to meet you. They're going to show you where you can sit and kind of organize your thoughts before you go out and teach. I'm like, oh, great. So I get there, and who's there to meet me? Judy. Because Judy, after I left, had become a Christian. God is transforming her life. She's come to know Jesus. And she's like, Bob, I just wanted to be the one to meet you because I just wanted to say thank you. And she said, I watched you and Bill. Now, you got to understand this, that Bill later left because he became a pastor. So this girl didn't even stand a chance. God sent 2 future pastors into her life. Like, there was no way she was not becoming a Christian. And she's like, but I just want to say thank you because you and Bill treated people like they matter. And it made me realize that if you treated us like we matter, and I came to realize that I must matter to God. And here's the point. This is why I tell you all this, is that whether you realize it or not, you are a missionary where you work. You are God's representative there. Now, I'm not talking about, you don't have to stand on the desk and start preaching and, do like come forward invitations, come to the break room if you want to come to know Jesus. But here's what it does mean, is that when you start thinking future Hey, why am I here? And acting in the present. What is it that I am here for a purpose? What is the reason? And here's what I love is that when my friend Bill, he left later to go into ministry and then spent a couple years here on staff with us before he went to go start a church. Bob, the owner, and the way that they would split us up is that they would call, at the time I was like 22, and they called me Young Bob, and then they just called him Bob because they didn't call him Old Bob because that would be rude. And so anyway, although I don't think now anybody be calling me Young Bob, which is why I will never hire anyone named Robert. But that's another story. But anyway, Bobby comes to him and says, Bill, hey, I just want to, man, Young Bob was so good, and you were so great. And he says this, and he says, can you send us some more people from your church? Because they just seem to work harder than everybody else and have a better attitude than everybody else. And listen, that was, for me, like, we got it. And you know what happened is that they did. They hired a bunch of people. A whole bunch of people came to know Jesus in that office. And it all started with one person, not me, my friend Bill, who hired somebody who said, hey, you have no skills. We have a job that requires no skills. And here's the point, right? Here's what Jesus said. He said, let your light shine before men that they might see what? Your good works. Not your good preaching. Not your, incredible social media posts. That they might see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. And what does that lead us to? It leads us to this. And this is number 3. And that is treat work like work matters. Treat work like work matters. And let me show you this picture. This is Martin Luther. Martin Luther was a German monk, theologian, university professor, church reformer, whose ideas were the spark of the Protestant Reformation. Although he looks like the kind of guy you'd find in some non-corporate coffee shop quoting poetry and talking about the importance of fair trade coffee beans, but that's not him. But here's this guy's ideas literally changed the course of Western civilization and was the seed that founded the Reformation and the Protestant Reformation. But here's what he said about work. He said this: the Christian shoemaker does his duty not by putting little crosses on the shoes, but by making good shoes, because God is interested in good craftsmanship. And listen, here's the point. The way that we work speaks to everyone about what we believe. The Apostle Paul was a guy, before he was the Apostle Paul, he was a guy named Saul. And this guy hated Christians. Saul hated Christians to the point where he would put Christians in jail. He would beat them. He would kill them at times to get them to recant their faith in Jesus and come back to Judaism. So this guy's like kind of, if there was a voted most likely not to convert, Paul would probably make that list in high school. And so amazingly, Paul has this incredible conversion experience and comes to know Jesus. And then he goes around and he starts planting all these churches. As he's planting all of these churches, he plants one in a town called Colossae. Colossae was in Asia Minor, which is kind of modern day Turkey. Kind of really, really far, Eastern Europe, Middle East. And here's what he says in his letter to them. He says, and whatever you do, do it heartily, as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance, for you serve the Lord Christ. Now understand something. Paul was a preacher, he was a church planter, and he also was a tent maker on the side. And what he's telling everybody is, I don't want you to think that I'm just serving God when I'm preaching. I'm not just serving God when I'm planting a church. I'm also serving God when I'm making tents as well. And that's the power of what happens when you decide that you're going to bypass your immediate boss and you're going to recognize that ultimately all of us, no matter who signs our paycheck, all of us work for God. And you know what happens when you decide that, hey, we all work for God? Our work gets better. Our attitude gets better. Our words get better. And you know what happens with people who do great work and have a great attitude and speak good words to others? They get promoted. They get raises. That's why Solomon says this in Proverbs 22. Do you see a man who excels in his work? He will stand before kings and will not stand before unknown men. So what if we all decided to do this tomorrow and work like God was our boss? I can tell you this, listen, it would change everything. For starters, you probably get a raise for getting more done. We'd probably reach more people in our place of work because our work ethic would say more about our character than words ever could. We'd probably gain the respect of our boss, of our peers, and our subordinates, and that attitude would change the game in our office environment when you realized, hey, I work for God. When I was in college working at this home accessories company, one of my tasks was to put stickers. So what would happen is before, once again, iPads and the internet and all that, these sales reps would go into like City Furniture and all these other companies, and they'd say, hey, this is our new line of home accessories. They would have literally like pictures, like real pictures that you printed out. Not printed out, you'd get film developed. And so I know I'm going, this is dinosaur stuff, but this would be in albums. And so if someone said, oh, I really like that, they'd have to know what the item number is. So what would happen is that my job was to take all the pictures and then put labels on all the pictures so that the reps could write the order numbers down and then fax them, because that was the new technology at the time, and then fax the orders to us. And so what I would do is that I would get all of the pictures that I needed to do, all the albums, and then once all that was done, I was going to FedEx it to all of the guys, all the sales reps. So I would go into this conference room, had this huge table, and then I'd have all my pictures, and I'd have a big stack of the Avery 5160 labels, and I would start affixing all of the stickers to the labels, and I'd be there for hours because all of this was I'd have to send all the stuff out, and then someone would walk by and they'd say, Bob, what are you doing? And with all of the hope I could muster, and maybe only a touch of sarcasm, not too much, just like a little sprinkle, like you'd sprinkle paprika. I would say, I'm changing the world one sticker at a time. And that was the best attitude I could muster. What are you doing? I'm changing the world one sticker at a time. And so let's fast forward 3 years. Now I'm running a college, and I'm 24 years old. Now, who gives a 24-year-old the keys to the car in running a college? People who need to be on medication or have taken too much medication, whichever, but it's something's out of whack. But anyway, they gave me run of the college. The college is doing well, and so I got to send out some catalogs. And typically my assistant would be the one to do this, but for whatever reason, maybe she wasn't there. Maybe I was just being a nice guy. I don't remember. But I remember I had a whole stack of catalogs, a whole stack of envelopes that I walk into our library at the school, and there's this big conference table, and I'm setting myself up, and then I get a big stack of Avery 5160 labels, and I start putting catalogs and a letter from me and a whole bunch of other stuff in this envelope, and then I started affixing the labels onto the envelopes. And I've been doing this for a while. Now, you've probably already connected the dots, but I went to public school, so it takes me a little bit longer. So I'm affixing the labels, and then it finally hits me. You see, because when I was in that library, I really thought I was changing the world one sticker at a time, because I was sure that the next pastor, the next church planter, the next missionary was going to get the catalog, decide to come to school at our school, and they were going to set the world on fire with their ministry and all of that. And here's the thing, and I had this revelation in that moment, is that it didn't matter. It didn't matter who was signing the paycheck. That I worked for God no matter what I did. Whether I was affixing a label to a catalog for future pastors, or whether I was affixing a label to a picture that was going to go for somebody to buy a home accessory for their house. Because in everything that we do, that it's for Him. And the day that we recognize that, the day that we embrace that, everything about our work changes. Because listen, our attitude about work is revealing God's work in me. And what's God's work in you? It's what we celebrate at communion. That Jesus died for us. That He died for us, but that's not where the story ends, because if that's where the story ends, none of us would be here. But the story ends that Jesus rose again from the dead and has offered us forgiveness and grace and life. And now we have the opportunity to walk in that and to now let our work be a reflection of His work in the place that we work. And then everything changes, because if God has done it for us, then He's going to do it in the lives of other people. So I'm going to invite the ushers to come forward, and we're going to celebrate communion together. And I'm going to invite you, as the ushers come forward, to grab the elements, hold on to them, and we're going to partake of communion together. So Pastor George, if you'd lead us.
Thanks for watching this week's message. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button below, and we'll make sure to keep you up to date with everything that's happening here at Calvary. God bless you.